begin, and I'll begin I'll begin with the chant, just so you know what it is, because I won't translate the whole thing, it's long. It begins with a couple of, one is a short salutation to the teachers, to the gurus, and the next is a little longer salutation to the lineage of teachers, starting from Narayana, that is God, down to the present day. So that takes a little while to get all of the teachers in. And then some of the Shanti mantras from the Upanishads. Om Namo Brahma Dibhyo Brahma Vidya Sambradaya Kartribhyo Vamsharshibhyo Mahadbhyo Namo Gurubhyaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Narayanam Padma Bhuvam Vashishtam Go Yogindra Govinda Mathasya Shishyam Shri Shankaracharya Mathasya Padma Padam Cha Hastamalakan Cha Shishyam Tantrotakam Vartikakara Manya Nasmad Gurun Santatamanatosmi. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryangaravavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shanno Mitra Shamvarunaha Shanno Bhavatvaryama Shanna Indro Brihaspatihi Shanno Vishnururukramaha. Namo Brahmane Namaste Vayo Tvameva Pratyaksham Brahmasi Tvameva Pratyaksham Brahma Vadishyami Ritam Vadishyami Satyam Vadishyami Tanmamavatu Tadvaktaramavatu Avatu mam avatu vaktaram. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Bhadram Karane Bhishrunuyama Devaha Bhadram Bhashye Makshabhirya Jatraha Sthirairangai Stuštuvagum Sastanubhihi Vyashema Devahitam Yadayuhu Swasti na Indro Vridhashravaha Swasti na Pusha Vishwavelaha Swasti na Starksho Arishtanemihi Swasti no Brihaspatir Dadhatu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tatchayyoravrimahe Gatun Yajnaya Gatun Yajnapataye Daivi Swastirastunaha Swastirmanushebhyaha Urdhvang Jigatu Bheshajam Shanno Astu Dvipade Shanchatushpade. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. For full disclosure, I haven't done that for a number of years, and so I skipped about 4,000 years worth of teachers. I went from Brahma Padma Bhuvam to Hastabalakam. Shankaracharya's, what was his name? Padmapada. From Padma Bhuva, which is Brahma, to Padma Pada, Shankara's disciple. So anyway, you wouldn't know most of you wouldn't have known the difference, but that's what happened. So usually this evening, I understand the class is on the Katha Upanishad. Swami Sarvadevanandaji is taking the Katha Upanishad, yes. And so I was given the topic, the Upanishads, because I'm just here for tonight, this class just for tonight. And so, of course, he is treating the Katha Upanishad in his own way, so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to come in and give a few verses of the Katha Upanishad in my way. So instead of that, I'm going to speak about the Upanishads in general. But as far as possible, I wanted to retain something of the nature of a class rather than a lecture. And so if you have questions or comments during the course of the hour, then please feel free to raise your hand or to say something. So, the Upanishads. I'll start by mentioning the revolutionary nature of the Upanishads. Now, by revolutionary nature, I don't mean, as many scholars have said, especially Western scholars, that the Upanishads were a revolution against the Vedas. I don't mean it in that sense. But a revolution in the sense that just as a plant, like a camellia, you have the green leaves and the stems and everything, but when the first blossom comes, it's like a revolutionary development. It comes from the camellia. It's part of the camellia. It's in a poetic way, you can say it's the very purpose of the camellia. And yet when you go from this plant with a small trunk and spindly branches and glossy green leaves, and you get this beautiful camellia flower coming, it's a revolutionary development. So the Upanishads were like that. They were the full flowering of Vedic knowledge, and they were anticipated by the Vedas themselves. Everything that came in the Upanishads was anticipated in the larger Vedic literature, the earlier Vedic literature, and yet it came as a revolutionary development, just as the flower comes from the plant. Paul Deussen, the great German Indologist that Swami Vivekananda himself met and talked with, traveled with, spent a couple of weeks with in England. First met him in Germany, and then Deussen followed Swamiji to England and spent a couple of weeks with him there also. Deussen said that that India was the first place, and the Upanishads were the first texts where the human mind went beyond the mythological mind. It went beyond the mythological mind. Everywhere else at that time, and in most places up to the present day, the mind has remained largely mythological. When what he meant, he didn't explain in detail, but what he meant was that people all over the world had up to that time, and continuing in other parts of the world, had remained interested in story. That is, where does this universe come from? Well, the question for ancient peoples was, who made this universe? You see this table, somebody made it. They took wood from a tree, someone cut down the tree, someone sawed it into boards, someone cured the wood, someone planed the boards, fitted them together, varnished them, etc., made a table out of them. So wherever we see something like this, we know someone has made it. And so, by analogy, we figure this complex universe, this vast universe with mountains and oceans and lakes and rivers and everything, somebody must have made it. So the ancient question was, who made this universe? Who made you and me? who made the sun, the moon, the stars, etc. Who separated the light from the darkness, as it says of course it says in Genesis that God did that. He separated light from darkness. He separated the firmament from the waters, that is, the earth from the waters. So who did all of this? The answers around the world were mythological, that there was a god or there were gods who made the universe. What causes the wind to blow? In most religions around the world at that time, the answer was that there was a wind god. Who makes the sun to rise? Well, there's the sun god who makes the sun to rise. Monotheistic religions contradicted that and said, well, there was one God who ruled over all of the other gods, and he was the one, it was his will, God's will, that made everything to function. But the question was still a mythological question. And so you see that even to the present day, other religions are largely mythological. I don't say by mythological that they are untrue, but that they're largely mythological. Whether it's Judaism, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Islam, though the three Abrahamic religions in particular are highly mythological. And again, I don't mean untrue. Take Christianity, for instance, which those of us here, most of us here, are more familiar with, of the three. But it's the same thing can be said of all three of them. In Christianity, the idea is that, or the story of Christianity is that God created the heavens and the earth, and God made a man and woman and put them in the Garden of Eden. And so even if you take that in an allegorical sense, as many modern Christians do, but still they believe that the story is an allegory of an actual creation. It's just that it didn't happen in 6 days, etc. But the story is, God made the heaven and earth. He made a man and woman, put them in the Garden of Eden. They disobeyed God. They fell from grace. And so again, even if you take it allegorically, as liberal Christians do nowadays, they still believe that this, in some way, it actually happened, that we are fallen from grace. So Adam and Eve disobeyed God. They fell from grace. God was upset, and so the wrath of God had to be appeased by a peace offering, and that was his only son, that his son incarnated, Jesus incarnated, in order to pay for the sins of humanity. And if we believe in Jesus, then we will be saved from death over again, that we'll be saved from eternal punishment and so forth. We'll go to heaven. And so all of that is, I'm not saying whether it's true or false, but it's a mythological answer to the questions of why are we here? Why do we find suffering? The same for Judaism, the same for Islam. The answers to life's questions are mythological, and again, not false, but mythological. They take the form of story. But the Upanishads didn't ask who made this universe. The Upanishads didn't ask what does God want me to do and what does God not want me to do? What does God like and what does God not like? What are God's commandments for me? Those were not the questions. The questions of the Upanishads, again, were what is existence? What is being? What is isness? What does this table is? What does it mean to say that this table is? You are. What does it mean to say that you are? You exist. I am. What is my existence? So they weren't asking what is the story behind this universe? What was who made what? The question was, what is existence itself? Sat. What is that? What is consciousness itself? I'm aware of you all, and you are aware of me. What does it mean that I am aware of you? What is awareness itself? What is the nature of awareness? When they looked outside into the universe, they said, well, what is the nature of the universe? Where has it come from? Yes, but not who made it, but out of what has it come? Out of what has it come? What is the nature of the universe? What is the nature of its existence? And when they looked inside of themselves, they said, who am I? Not who made me. and who wants me to behave in a certain way, and how does he want me to behave, and so forth. No, who am I? What is the nature of my consciousness? What is the nature of my mind? What is the purpose of existence, but not in the sense of referring me to some mythological deity. What does God want me to do? But no, what is the purpose of my existence in its own terms? What is the nature of everything in its own terms? And Swami Vivekananda said that that's why the religion taught in the Upanishads was a scientific religion. Not in the sense that they had electron microscopes and other such instrumentation, but in the sense that they wanted to know the explanation of everything from within itself. Again, religions had always asked for the explanation of all of this from outside. How did he make it? How did some god or gods make everything? It wasn't how did this table come to be, but who made it? How did this universe come to be, but who made the universe, and how did he make it? So the Upanishads were a radical departure from that. In the Vedas, those questions had been answered, in the earlier part of the Vedas, they had been answered largely mythologically. There were places where even in the early parts of the Vedas, where they went beyond the mythological mind also, foreshadowing the coming of the Upanishads. For instance, the first record in human history of the Advaitic experience, Advaitic knowledge, that I am the universe, that the universe arises within me, is in the Devi Suktam. That is, it was a suktam written by a woman rishi, a woman sage, whose name was Vak. She was the daughter of a great sage herself. Her father was a rishi, and she herself was a rishi. And that's the first place where you get the clear expression of Advaita, non-dualism, that I am the universe. It is by my will that everything arises, not my little will, not Swami Atmarupananda's will or Vag Devi's little will, but the cosmic will that she had identified herself with. And so there you find also the mind going beyond the limited. But in the Upanishads it's full-blown. And it's quite clear. The Upanishads were interested in knowing the nature of things, not who made them. So, again, Deussen said that in the Upanishads you find the first transcendence of the mythological mind. Even now, if you do interreligious work, and again, I'm not saying that other religions are false. We don't believe that. We believe that all religions are good. And other religions, by any religion, you can come to the realization of the highest truth. But in other religions, even now, you find that they have not separated mythology from the principles of their religion. If you ask them for the principles of their religion, they'll tell you a mythological story. They won't tell you principles. That everything has come out of existence itself, that the nature of everything is existence, everything is consciousness itself, that the whole universe arises within consciousness, it exists within consciousness, and it returns to consciousness. They won't say such things. They'll tell the teachings of their religion in terms of a story. And so that was one of the greatnesses of the Upanishads, and that's why Swami Vivekananda thought that the Upanishads would form the basis of a modern religion. He didn't mean that in a missionizing sense, that we should go out and turn everybody into a Vedantin or a believer in the Upanishads, but he thought that that other religions would continue, but in time people would be influenced by this idea that everything should be explained from within itself. That is possible for other religions to do as well. If Vedanta did it, other religions can do it as well. But Vedanta was the first to do it thousands of years ago, and it's still the only one who has done it, except for Buddhism, and Buddhism grew out of the Vedantic revolution itself. And so still it was the Vedanta which first opened that door, and then the Buddha took that foundation and developed the religion of Buddhism. So the mythological mind, and therefore it's a scientific religion. Now that's one of the reasons why it's a scientific religion. There were other reasons Vivekananda gave, but that was one. Another great thing of the Upanishads was that it was human-oriented, or more correctly stated, it was self-oriented, but to understand that is a little more difficult. So let me develop this idea that the Upanishads were human-oriented first. And again, not to criticize them, but to make a distinction in order to understand the importance of the Upanishadic revolution. Other religions, like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, you find that they are God-centric. God is the basic fact. Not the human soul, but God is the basic fact. God is the explanation of everything. But the Upanishads took a radical departure. They said, who am I? Who am I? They turned the attention towards the self. Why is that important? Because I understand the whole universe in terms of myself. No matter who I am or what my religion, what my philosophy, I understand everything in terms of myself, and I can only understand the universe in terms of myself. I can't understand any more of the universe than I've understood of myself. And so the Upanishads turned the attention of humanity to the self, not to who is God and how can I serve him, or who is God and how can I serve her for the Divine Mother, but who am I? If I know that, then I can relate myself, if there is a God, I can relate myself to God. But if I don't know who I am, I haven't known the basic fact of existence. In other religions, you start with faith in God. But I haven't seen God. I haven't talked to God. God hasn't talked to me. So I have to start with, well, my book says that God is, and my book says that you should believe in him, and this my book says that this is what God wants you to do. One of the great things that the Buddha did was he took not a theological principle, not a philosophical principle, he took an experiential principle and started with that life is suffering, life is dukkha. It doesn't mean that everything in life is sad. It means that everything in life is insufficient. Even the best experiences are not sufficient. And so we started with the fact that we try to deny, but we can't deny, an experiential fact. The Upanishads before the time of Buddha did the same, but they started from a different place, not contradicting the Buddha didn't contradict it, but the Vedanta started from a different place. It said that the one thing you can't deny is that I am. The one thing that you can deny everything else, but you can't deny your own self-existence. Who showed that to us in historically recent times, that is a few centuries ago? That was René Descartes, the great mathematician and philosopher. So René Descartes, he said he was primarily a mathematician who took an interest in philosophy. And so if you look at why can I never remember the name of the great Greek grammarian? I always think Ptolemy and then I think of Pythagoras, but whose grammar do we study in the beginning of geometry? Huh? Euclid, yes, Euclid, thank you, Euclid. I don't know why, I can never remember Euclid. It's so easy. I've known it since I was in elementary school, and I still can never remember Euclid. So Euclidean geometry, you begin with axioms, things that are assumed to be so obvious that we know that they are true. And then on top of that, you build theorems, and then you prove the theorems on basis of axioms, and then you prove more theorems on the basis of axioms plus the previous theorems that have already been proven. So you start with that which cannot be denied. Of course, in modern times, in the 19th century, mathematicians showed that some of the basic axioms of Euclidean geometry could be doubted. But aside from that, they seem to be obvious. And so René Descartes thought that why can't we do the same with philosophy? Let us start with axiomatic truths, those things which cannot be denied. And on the basis of that, just as with geometry, we can do the same with philosophy. We can take the principles which are undeniable and build theorems on top of them and thereby build a philosophy. Because he was worked up over the fact that everything in philosophy is so questionable. There's no philosophy that has ever won the argument for all times. Philosophers are still arguing over the same points they were arguing over 2,000, 3,000 years ago. And every new philosophy comes up and another philosopher comes and knocks it down. And so he thought, well, why should that be? It's not the same in mathematics. Why shouldn't philosophy be the same as mathematics, and particularly geometry? So he started with this. What is known? And famously he said that, well, my senses, I can't trust my senses, because I know that if I have jaundice, I see everything as yellow, but that's because of my jaundice, not because everything is yellow. And so in that way, the senses are instruments that reveal the outer world to me, but if there's a problem with the instrument, then my experience is vitiated by the problem in the instrument. So I can't trust my experience of the external world, because it could be that my senses are all from birth are defective and it's giving me the wrong information. For instance, we don't know, and there's no way of knowing, whether blue means the same for each of us. We all point to something called blue, and we know through scientific experimentation that blue is represents a certain wavelength of light. But what blue is in your eyes and what blue is in my eyes, who knows if it's the same? And so Descartes said that we can't be sure of the external world because it's known only through the senses, and the senses can be defective. So then he said, what about my thoughts? What about my ideas? Well, my ideas also, many types of mental illness, of insanity, are characterized by the fact that I think I'm sane and everyone else is insane. And so it may be that all of my ideas are crazy, and I don't know it because of the nature of my illness, and so I can't trust my thoughts either. So he had discounted the external world, he had discounted the internal world, the world of thoughts at least. So then he said, so I can doubt the external world, I can doubt the world of my own thoughts, but I can't doubt myself because I'm present in the midst of the doubting. I can't doubt myself because I'm there in the midst of the doubting. So how can I who am doubting, how can I doubt myself? It's impossible because I'm there doubting. And so he said that cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. Vedanta says that was a brilliant beginning and a very unfortunate ending. The beginning was brilliant, and it's in tune with the Upanishadic thought, but the ending was, I think, therefore I am. Vedanta says, no, I am, therefore there's a possibility of thinking, though I don't need to think. I think I need to think, but I don't need to think. But I am, therefore, everything else. So he had an intuitive grasp of the fact that I am. And I can't doubt that. I have my own self-existence. And that is the beginning of Vedanta. That's the beginning of the Upanishads, that I am. I can doubt everything else, but I can't doubt that I am. And so that's why the Upanishads begin with this fact of existence, that I am. That's the one thing I can't doubt. Who I am, I may not know clearly, and that's what the Upanishads are about. The discovery of who I really am. Not who I think I am, but who I really am. But it was a brilliant beginning by Descartes. The reason he couldn't come to the correct conclusion was that there was no tradition whatsoever in Western thought up to that time, with very minor exceptions which were not very clear and not clearly known. There was no active tradition of understanding consciousness itself. Thought was thought to be conscious. A conscious thought was consciousness. Even today in the West, when people other than Vedantins or people influenced by Eastern wisdom and some Mahayana Buddhists, when they talk about consciousness in the West, people are talking about conscious mental activity. They don't see consciousness as a reality in itself, free of all activity, free of time, free of space, the reality itself in which everything else appears. You appear within my consciousness. My thoughts appear within my consciousness. This body appears within my consciousness. When I die, that will appear within my consciousness. When I'm born, that will appear within my consciousness. Everything appears within consciousness, but consciousness is the pure light of awareness, the pure light which illumines all experience, but which does not need any object of experience. It's self-luminous. It shines in its own glory. The problem is that we don't know it. We don't see it. We see consciousness as of a function of the mind. And of course, modern material science and modern materialism says that consciousness is just an epiphenomenon, just as as we secrete bile, so we secrete consciousness. When the matter is in a certain complex formation called the brain, we secrete consciousness. It's a product of material secretions. But Vedanta says no. How can you say that? No one has ever experienced matter. No one has ever experienced matter. It's impossible to experience matter. And even a philosopher of science will tell you the same thing, that you can't possibly experience matter. We experience color, we experience pressure, we experience temperature, we experience sound, so that we experience tastes, we experience smells, but that's not matter. Matter is a theory. It's not even a good theory, it's a hypothesis for explaining our sensory experience. We say, well, the table is made of matter, Swami. Show me the matter. Show me the matter. You only see color. And through color, light and dark and color, you see texture, etc. And with your hand, you feel pressure, etc. You don't feel matter. You can't possibly jump out of your skin and experience matter. You can't even experience your body as matter. You experience your body also through the senses. Only sensory information is all we get. And again, philosophers of science admit that. But they don't want to go there because it's uncomfortable. If you remove the physical universe and material universe, then it seems to take everything away that we want. And so they're not willing to go with their conclusions. In fact, you can read in some books, scientific books, that they will come to a certain point on certain matters where they say that this is an unwanted conclusion, because if you carry the conclusions to their end, you find you come to something that most people don't want, like the world disappearing. So it's an unwanted conclusion. So Vedanta said that you start with consciousness because that's all that we know. So Descartes said, as Vedanta says, that I know that I am. That's the one thing I can't doubt. What else do I know? I know that I am. I am, and I know that I am. So I am, but I am as a knower. I am as awareness itself. That's the one thing that we are sure of. One thing we're sure of. Everything else is an appearance within consciousness. And so the Vedantic sages, the Upanishadic sages, they wanted to go to the root of that to find out who I am in myself, in my deepest self. What is consciousness in its deepest reality? If consciousness is the light which illumines all experience, what is the nature of experience itself? And what is the nature of that consciousness which illumines experience? And of course they found in the Upanishads that eventually they came to the discovery that that which consciousness illumines is the same as consciousness itself. That this which looks so solid and so dead and material and so contrary to consciousness, that this is just an appearance of consciousness. It's just a manifestation of consciousness. You and I, who look like we're these individual beings, so real, we're born and we die, we get sick, we get well, sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're sad, all of these things which are so real to us. We have problems which are so important to us. We have sufferings which are so important to us, that we are just manifestations of pure divine consciousness. That we are, but we're not who we think we are. That who we think we are is just something that appears within our consciousness, and we think, oh, that's me. That's the problem. And so this was, again, a discovery of the Upanishads. So first of all, they sought the nature of reality itself, not who made things and what's the story behind all of this, but what is existence itself, what is consciousness itself. Then they turned to the self because they found that the self is primary. That's the one thing that I can be sure of. I can doubt God, but I can't doubt myself. Now let me just take a moment to answer a possible question that some of you might not have right now, but if you, as you think of it more, you might come up with it, especially those of you who have studied Buddhism. The Buddha begins by denying the self. And so here I'm saying that the one thing that we're sure of is the self, and Buddha begins by denying the self. Now to me, that's the greatest weakness in Buddha's thought. There's a reason why he did that, I think. And obviously there's a reason why he did it, but I think that the reason why he did it was a good pragmatic reason. He was denying the phenomenal self. At the same time, he never posited a transcendental self. He denied selfhood altogether. But that's one of the greatest confusions and one of the greatest complications in Buddhist philosophy. There are many great things in Buddhism, but the greatest difficulty in Buddhism is, what's the connection between me and the experience of enlightenment? What's the experience between me and enlightenment? Now, Theravadins, the so-called Southern Buddhists, will say that when you realize you don't exist and when you disappear, then nirvana is. Well, that's great for nirvana, but what about me? It's like coming to a philosopher and saying, I have a question, and he says, okay, and he takes a hammer and hits you over the head and makes you unconscious, and well, question solved. No more questioner. So there has to be a connection. If in Buddhism they believe that there are many who have attained to enlightenment, that Buddha himself attained to enlightenment. What is the connection between Buddha and enlightenment if there's no self? So the Vedantic answer to me is far, far clearer, far more experientially satisfying as well as philosophically satisfying. What the Buddhists will say is that, yes, one attains to enlightenment when you realize that there is no self, and that within every, Mahayana Buddhists will say that within everyone there's the potential for enlightenment, but that enlightenment doesn't belong to a self. Well, yeah, that's okay. Vedanta says the same thing. But Vedanta says that that intuitive sense of selfhood which I have now, which I misapply to this body and mind, is the same which attains to enlightenment. And that's why I can attain to enlightenment, not as Swami Atmarupananda, but when that idea of false identification goes, then I realize I am the infinite, that which I always was, am now, and ever will be, the same which all of us are, that I will attain to that. But it's the sense of self which is the intuitive grasp of reality itself, and that never disappears, not in waking, not in sleeping, not in deep sleep, not in death, not in enlightenment. In all states of consciousness, in all experiences, that sense of I am is there. Even the I am disappears, but it disappears into silent awareness. It doesn't disappear in the sense that I am not. It's the affirmation of I am, that disappears, and just silent being remains. I had, when I was young, when I was about 12 years old, 11 it would have been, I used to love to play football. Even in baseball season, I would still try to get people to play football because I didn't like baseball, I loved football. And being a kid, still, if I got tackled or if I tackled someone, I still bounced and got up and ran some more. So I played back lot football, tackle football, which usually was not dangerous most of the time. Once when I was 11, I was playing backlot football with, there were only 4 of us, 2 on each team. So one was the quarterback and one was the one who went to catch the pass, and then 2 others were trying to, one either tackle this person or whoever had the ball. One person on this person, one person on that person. So Linda Johnson, a tomboy in our neighborhood, who was our best football player, and my best friend, we were on one team and the 2 others on another team. So I went out for a pass. We had the ball. I went out for a pass, and Linda threw the ball to me, and I had to jump to catch it, and I fell down, hit my head on the hard clay ground, and I was knocked unconscious. I was only unconscious for a couple of seconds. I came to. But I still remember the experience, and I was amazed at the time. I'd never studied Vedanta or anything. Everything went black. There was nothing, no awareness of anything. My body was gone, thoughts were gone, everything was gone. But I remember when I came to, so that's what unconsciousness means. I was aware of blackness. I was aware of there being nothing. But I was conscious at that age of the fact that I had just experienced the absence of everything. But I had experienced it. It wasn't that I was thinking, I am, here I am unconscious. No, there was no thought, no perception, but I was there perceiving the no perception. as a non-physical being. And so that's what Vedanta says happens in deep sleep. It may happen in death, it may happen in unconsciousness, that is always present. And so that's what the Upanishads were seeking. Who am I in my deepest reality? What is my deepest reality? So again, they were seeking selfhood. I'm not looking for telephone calls. I've got my notes on here. So they were seeking the self. That was the ultimate search of the Upanishads. And that, again, is important because it's the one thing that we know. And another feature of the Upanishads, I just have a few more ideas I want to share with you. Another feature of the Upanishads was the extraordinary questions that they asked. Swami Vivekananda, speaking about the rise of Buddhism within India, he said, "How wonderful must have been the education of ancient India at the time of the Buddha, when kings and queens left their thrones to follow his teachings." The Buddha's teachings were not easy to grasp. He didn't tell things in terms of story. He didn't say, well, there's a God, and if you love him, he'll save you, and you do make these offerings and do these ceremonies, and God will like you, and God wants you to do this, but he doesn't want you to do that. There was nothing like that in Buddhism. It was a highly philosophical religion, a religion of principles. So Swamiji said, how wonderful must have been the education of ancient India, that people were ready to give up their queens and kings were ready to give up their thrones. Business people were ready to give up their businesses to follow the Buddha. They were able to grasp the importance of what he was saying. And so that was true of the Upanishadic time, because Buddha came after the end of the Upanishadic age. The Vedic age was still going, but the major Upanishads had already been established when he came. And so how wonderful was the education. And you see that in the Upanishads themselves. First of all, that they were able to go beyond the mythological mind, the story-oriented mind, to see principles. And let me stop on that and then I'll come pick up the thread again. Swamiji, one of the things Swamiji did, one of the great things he did for Hinduism and for Vedanta as a part of Hinduism and for the world, was that he saw in the Vedanta, meaning in the Upanishads, a religion of principles, a religion of principles. Gravitation, the Newtonian theory of gravitation, was discovered by Newton in England. But that doesn't mean that gravitation is copyrighted by England or patented by England and none of the rest of us can use it. No, gravitation is a principle. It works in America, it works in Antarctica, it works at the North Pole, it works on the moon, it works on Jupiter, it works on the sun, it works in distant galaxies, because it's a principle. You don't have to be English to believe in gravitation. You don't have to be English to use gravity. No, it's a principle. And so Swami Vivekananda saw that the Vedanta, the Upanishads, were taught a religion of principles. That is, principles which are universal in their application. They're not culturally defined. They're not dependent on a particular culture. The principles of Vedanta work in America as well as they work in India. It's to the eternal glory of India that India discovered these principles first and nurtured them and continued them for thousands of years. But they're not Indian. They are universal. They're true everywhere. They're true on the moon. They're true on the sun. They're true on Jupiter. They're true in distant galaxies. They're true tens of thousands of years ago, and they'll be true millions of years hence, because they're principles. And so that is another great thing of the Upanishads, that they discovered principles. So again, coming back to the point I was making, that the mind of the ancient Indian civilization had reached such a high level of culture, such a high level of education, and that is seen in the Upanishads. And one of the places it's seen, in particular in the Upanishads, is in the wonderful questions of the Upanishads. Extraordinary questions. Questions that were asked at that ancient time, several thousand years ago, which we haven't even formulated yet in other parts of the world, which we can't even formulate them yet. We can't even think about them. For instance, in the Mundaka Upanishad, the question is asked, a young man comes to the teacher Angiras and asks him to teach him about the Brahman. And he says, Kasminnu bhagavo vijñāte sarvamidam vijñātam bhavatiti. What is that, O revered sir, by knowing which everything here becomes known? What is that one thing by knowing which everything here becomes known? Where has that question ever been asked outside of the Upanishads? Where has that question been asked? You won't find it. The very idea is ridiculous to most people. What do you mean, what is that one thing by knowing which everything is known? That's a silly question. Yes, Tara?
Isn't that what Einstein, when he was saying he was looking for a unified field theory, wasn't he kind of looking for that?
He was going in that direction. He wasn't looking for that, because, and that's a good question. But what he was looking for was one theory which would explain the five manifestations of energy. He wanted one theory, the unified field theory, meant one theory that would explain the different types of energy, the nuclear forces and electromagnetic force, etc., gravitation, etc. So he wanted one theory that would explain, but that was a limited thing. That was within the field of physics. He wanted one thing that would explain these five physical forces. He wasn't looking for one thing that would explain everything in the universe. So he was going, and as Swami Vivekananda said, that all knowledge is a search for unity. All knowledge is a search for unity. What all knowledge is classification. That's what knowledge is. All knowledge is classification. And classification means trying to find something that explains a large variety of things. When I try to understand language, I developed the science of grammar. I try to find the rules that make language possible. And I try to find the fewest number of rules that explain the largest number of grammatical or linguistic forms. When I look in biology, I try to find the basic principles of life, what makes life possible. When I look in chemistry, I try to find the basic chemical element or elements out of which all of this variety comes. And so all of knowledge is seeking for unity, and that's what Einstein was doing in a bigger way than any scientist had ever done before him. But this question was, what is that one thing by knowing which everything is known? Everything is known. So again, it sounds ridiculous on the very face of it, because how could I know one thing by which I would know Swahili and Arabic and Chinese, and I would know nuclear physics, and I would know microbiology and macrobiology and everything else? How is it possible to know one thing by which everything is known? Oh no, they weren't fools. They didn't think that there was one thing that you could learn one thing and thereby you could speak Arabic and Chinese and Swahili and every other language. No. But they were looking for the one reality out of which everything here has come. And the analogy given in the Chandogya Upanishad is that of clay. That if you take clay, you can make it into an infinite number of forms. You can make a clay elephant, a clay man, a clay mouse, clay snake, clay ashtray, all sorts of things you can make out of clay, but all of it is made out of clay. You may not know all of the infinite forms. It's not possible to hold in the mind all of the infinite forms that could be made out of clay, because you can make 100 trillion forms out of clay, and I could come along and in 10 of them just stick my finger in it, and there you've got 10 more different forms that you hadn't had in the 10 trillion forms. So that you can go on infinitely dividing the forms that can be made out of clay. But if you know clay, you know the reality of each of those forms. And by knowing clay, you know the potential to take on infinite number of forms. And so the Upanishadic seers, the intent of the question was, and the answer of the sages was, that there's one reality out of which everything here has come. If you know that reality, you know the essence of everything, whether it's language or biology or physics or everything, you know the essence of everything. You don't know the details, just as you don't know, by knowing clay, all of the possible forms that could be made, because they're infinite in number, unlimited in number. But you know the essence of everything. And so, again, that very question, to formulate that question, kasminu bhagavo vijñāte, oh revered sir, what is that by knowing which sarvam idam vijñātam bhavati iti, everything here becomes known. In the Kena Upanishad, it's named the Kena. Why? Kena means by what, or because of what. Why? It's the why Upanishad. Kena means why, or because of what, or through what. It's named the Kena Upanishad because it begins with a question. Keneshitam patati preshitam manaha. Kena prana pratama praiti yukta. Keneshitam vachamimam vadanti. Chakshu shrotram kau devo yunakti. So keneshitam patati preshitam manaha. By whom is this mind, directed by whom does this mind fall on its objects of thought? Now we think, well, the mind does it. There's not somebody behind the mind doing it, but no, the Upanishadic seers were aware of the fact, and this question shows that they were aware of the fact that the mind is an instrument. An instrument is for what? An instrument doesn't serve its own purpose. An instrument is for the purpose of another. So by whom, directed by whom, does this mind fall on its objects of thought? That is, directed by whom does this mind think? They realized that there was the self, which is beyond the mind, and it's for the sake of the self that all thinking takes place. It's for the sake of the self that the senses give us all of this information from the outer world. So the self is the end and aim of all experience. That's the keneshitam patati preshitam manaha kena prana pratama praiti yukta. By whom directed do the pranas, the vital forces, function? Directed by whom does the speech, vachamimam, does this speech work? Directed by whom do the eyes and the ears function? So the idea is, for whose purpose does all of this function? In Indian, traditional Indian philosophy, as some of you know, there were 6 systems of traditional Indian philosophy, Orthodox Indian, Hindu philosophy, I should say. There were more schools outside of Hindu philosophy, but 6 systems of Orthodox Hindu philosophy. 2 of them, Nyaya Vaisheshika, were concerned with the nature of matter and logic, the logical operations, the operation of logical thinking. 2 more, Sankhya and Yoga, were psychological systems. They were concerned with the nature of mind, how the mind operates, the nature of psychology. And the last 2, Uttarmimamsa and Purvamimamsa, were the philosophical schools, the metaphysical schools, those who were looking for the ultimate answers. And Uttarmimamsa means the Vedanta philosophy. If you look at these natural pairs, and it's recognized that they fall into these pairs, Nyaya Vaisheshika, matter and logical operations, then Sankhya Yoga, psychology, and then the 2 Mimamsas, that is metaphysical conclusions, you find that it follows the development of the modern world. That from the beginning of the Renaissance and the beginning of the scientific inquiry into the nature of matter, people began to look, what is the nature of this material universe? And they used logic to analyze the nature of the universe. So it was the nature of matter and logical operations, including mathematics, as they began to discover that the universe could be represented mathematically. Then they wanted to know the nature of matter through the operations of logic. So that's Nyaya Vaisheshika. No, modern science has gone a long way in some ways from Nyaya Vaisheshika, but in principle it's the same thing. Then in the late 19th century, and continuing as a flood tide in the 20th century up to the present day in the 21st century, people began to take an interest in psychology. They thought that, well, okay, through modern science and technology, I'm no longer hungry, I've got clothes, I've got a house, I can heat the house, and in the 20th century I could even cool the house through air conditioning. But my mind hurts. I've taken care of my physical needs, but my mind hurts. So beginning in the 19th century and then continuing in a huge way in the 20th century, the West took an interest in psychology because they suddenly discovered that the body isn't everything, matter's not everything. I can take care of the body and I have a mind that hurts. When I'm hungry, when I'm cold, when I have no shelter, I don't have time to think about the mind hurting. I've got to get something to eat and I've got to get warm and I've got to get shelter. But when those things are taken care of, then suddenly I realize, no, I've got a mind and my mind is troubled. And so this interest in psychology, Sankhya and Yoga. But then a time comes when people will realize, they haven't yet, but they're beginning to wake up to it, that, okay, I can work with the mind, but what is the purpose of the mind? What's behind the mind? That is, you come to metaphysical problems. You come to metaphysical questions, and that's where Vedanta comes in, and the idea of the self. And so at that early time in the Upanishads, they were asking, Keneshitam patati preshitam manaha? By whom directed does this mind fall on its objects? That's where one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why Buddhism became so immensely popular in the 20th century into the 21st century in the Western world. There are reasons because of the greatness of Buddhism, but another reason why in particular Buddhism became so popular in the second half of the 20th century and into the 21st century is that Buddhism, the interpreters of Buddhism that came to the West, the Suzukis and others who came, and the Lamas and others who came to the West, Zen Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, even Theravada, they presented Buddhism largely as psychology. If you read books on mindfulness, if you read books on Tibetan Buddhism, you'll find a huge emphasis on psychology. It's not that Buddhism is not metaphysical, it is metaphysical. Buddhism has a lot of ritual, Buddhism has a lot of mythology, Buddhism has everything. But for whatever reason, I don't think it was even conscious. I think it was just something in the air. That the Buddhist interpreters who came, they recognized a need perhaps, and they taught Buddhism as psychology. And people responded because people were crazy about psychology. They were crazy and wanted psychology, or they were crazy about psychology. And but the time will come when people will want to know, well, what is beyond psychology? What is the ultimate? Of course, Buddhism, again, has a metaphysical side, but that hasn't been emphasized. If you listen to someone like the Dalai Lama, and just taking him as an example, and this is true across the spectrum of Buddhism, but the Dalai Lama is very well known nowadays. The Dalai Lama is highly educated in Buddhist philosophy and the metaphysics of Buddhism. But when he speaks, what does he speak about? He speaks about happiness. Everybody wants to be happy. So try to be happy. Try to make others happy. Learn to be compassionate because that's the way to be happy. Everything is couched in psychological terms and very ordinary, very simple. If you listen to the Dalai Lama for long, and if you listen critically rather than sympathetically, I recommend listening sympathetically because he's a very good man and a very intelligent and wise man. But if you want to be a critic, you find that he really doesn't have much to say. He doesn't say much. He says, be compassionate, be kind, be happy. That's all that he says. It's not that all that he has to say. Yes, Sumi.
Swami, listening to you is always educational. Would you, as you distinguish between Abrahamic religions and Buddhist thought, huge divide, because the latter do not see consciousness as a faculty of the mind.
Ah, yes.
And yet, there is this several millennia of debate and dissension going along, and if you read each other's literature, the other party sort of seems pretty simple-minded in their arguments. And yet, if you look at the Buddha himself, like the Christ, so little of what we think of as Buddhism really came out of his mouth.
Yes, yes.
Just like Christianity.
Just like Christianity, yes.
It's all the accretions.
Ah.
But then the same could be said of Hinduism, which might not have an originator. But then, for example, the Benares that Buddha walked through is not the Benares of today.
No, not at all.
Hinduism also accretions building.
Yes, yes.
So it's really very difficult to talk of either one religion, because they are chameleon like, they grow, they change, and so on. Now, with the Buddha, it seems to me that looking at his place and time in history, probably he did not want to get into the traps of certain ideas,
Yes.
which were so hard and concrete in Hinduism, and therefore his reluctance to define heaven, hell, the self. And yet, if you look at ultimately the proclamations that we hear, the Upanishads and so on, they might use the word self, but the words themselves go in and out. They're not always the same. But they're talking about a state of mind which probably one can only start with exploring through the self. Otherwise, what do we have? But then as you go on and on, ultimately, the two arenas don't look that unfamiliar. If the Buddha discarded the self, and then we're all left puzzling, okay, then what do you believe in incarnation? So did self got this backpack? If there's no self and so forth. But those are all little snits we get into.
Yes, yes.
But ultimately, when we talked earlier about consciousness itself, this all-pervading background where you can see yourself being born, dying, reborn, and so on. Who sees? Who's there to see? There isn't a self, or if you talk about a sakshi, the sakshi is not a person with any senses to record or make note. It happens, it unravels, very much like the Buddhists see it all the time. It keeps unraveling. So I like the Upanishads saying, you can say it happened, and you can say, like Gaurupana, nothing happens. And both stances are equally valid. And the self that we hold on to in the Upanishads and see as a vacuum in Buddhism probably is like that stick which is so useful to the guardian who sits at the cremation ground after all the relatives weep and wave and go home. He has to sit there and prod the carcass so that it can keep burning and not get covered with ash. And yet, when morning comes and the whole carcass is consumed, sorry to use that word, but it's the truth.
Yes.
He doesn't take it home. He says, that's a handy stick. I'll keep it for the next body. He throws it in, and there's nothing to take home. So maybe we are holding on to the stick with greater ferocity than even the Upanishads ask us to. And maybe it is, the Buddha himself said nothing about it. It is the Nagarjunas, the Shantidevas, the Atisha's. I've been to the Dalai Lama's classes versus his lectures.
Yes.
I understood very little of most of what he said. But when he expounded Nagarjuna's Ratnavali, Atisha's the great impact. It is totally different from the lectures he gives about being happy. And he's such a laughing man, he's endearing, adorable. But when he's expounding these texts,
Yeah, no, I didn't say anything contrary to that. Nothing at all contrary. That's why I said that the Dalai Lama is extremely learned. He knows the metaphysics. He knows Atisha. He knows Nagarjuna. He knows all of that. And when he's teaching his monks or learned audience, Buddhist learned audience, he can teach all of that. But that's why I said, that's why I made a distinction, that he knows all of that. But when his public message, the message he gives to everybody, be happy, be compassionate, everybody wants to be happy, everybody wants to be loved, and so that's his public message. So it's not, as I said over and over again, that's not all that he knows, but that is his public message. And that's what he says over and over, and that's what's in the books. I'm not criticizing it, as I said. If you want to be critical, and you look at it as a critic, you see that, well, he doesn't have anything to say. He just says, be nice and be kind and be good and compassionate. No, I don't mean that should be criticized, because that's a message that people need, and that's why he gives it. And it's effective because people want it. And also, it's not all that he knows, but that's what he emphasizes in his public message. That was all that I would say.
I understand what you say.
Yeah.
But he's fettered by the fact that he's a political icon. He stands for so many other things.
Yes.
And he cannot therefore speak like a Shankara. He is very fettered by the larger role that he sees his people regard him.
Ah, yes, yes.
And that fetters him. But Buddhism in itself, if you look at what came out of the Buddha's mouth, it's a totally different thing than all the. And today's Buddhists, especially in the wake of G.T. Suzuki and so on, it's a totally different slant.
The time is we're already 5 minutes past time, so I'll have to stop you now because otherwise we've gone into Buddhism and talking about Buddhism, and we've gotten far from the Upanishads. So I'm sorry, but I was aiming to keep within the hour, so I will stop and just say that the Upanishads are one of the grandest studies that anyone can undertake. The Upanishads are an extraordinary study, and they are a surprisingly modern study. The teachings that the Upanishads give, as Swami Vivekananda felt, that the Upanishads teach what modern humanity needs. Again, it's not that Christianity will disappear, Judaism or Islam, or that we want them to disappear, or Buddhism. All of those traditions have produced great, great saints, and they continue to do great good to a great many people. But Swami Vivekananda thought that each religion, each tradition has something to contribute, and that one of the things that Hinduism has to contribute is this emphasis on principles, and particularly the principles of the Upanishads. So he said over and over again that if you look at my teachings, Swamiji speaking, if you look at my teachings, you'll see that I have taught only from the Upanishads. And it's true. If you study Swamiji's teachings, you'll find that everything that he taught is founded in the Upanishads, refers back to the Upanishads, and is an extraordinary commentary on the Upanishads themselves. So, Om Dyo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apas Shanti Oshadhaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sama Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in the heavens, peace is in the sky, peace is on earth, peace is in the waters, peace in the plants and the trees. The gods are peaceful. Peace is the nature of truth. All is peace. Peace alone, peace. May that peace, real peace, be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all the beings of the universe.